The town of Glacier Hollow was so small it didn't have traffic lights. Just two intersecting streets, a diner that still smelled like the 1970s, and a sky that stretched forever. At night, the mountains vanished into the dark, leaving only the stars so close it felt like you could pluck one down if you were brave enough to climb. Lena Carter never looked up for too long anymore. Not since her husband died 5 years ago overseas. The stars had felt like promises back then. Now they were just distant reminders of things that didn't come home. She lived in a cabin at the edge of town, a short walk from the lake, with her 6-year-old daughter, Ellie. Their mornings smelled of coffee and acrylic paint. Their nights were quiet, the kind of quiet that made you talk softer without knowing why. Lena made a living painting skies. Not just any skies, their sky, Glacier Hollow's sky, where the constellations seemed to shimmer a little differently depending on the season. Tourists bought her prints at the Saturday market. Locals commissioned her to paint the view from their porch. And on her better days, she even took Ellie out to the ridge behind their cabin, pointing at constellations her husband used to name. "That one's Orion," she'd say, and Ellie would whisper, "He's the one with the sword, right?" Lena always smiled. "That's right. The protector." It was late spring when Dr. Michael Reyes arrived in town. No one expected a heart surgeon to move somewhere this small, the kind of place where the post office also sold fishing permits. He rented the old clinic building near Main Street, painted its shutters a fresh green, and hung a small wooden sign that read, "Dr. M. Reyes, Cardiology and Family Care." The town talked, as small towns do. Some said he'd been run out of a big city hospital. Others said he'd come for the fishing. No one knew the truth, and Michael didn't offer it. He kept to himself, fixed the plumbing with his own hands, and spent most evenings walking by the lake long after dark. The first time Lena saw him, she was carrying 2 canvases across the street, rain threatening overhead. He stepped out of the diner and, without a word, held an umbrella over her. "Thanks," she said, a little surprised. "Rain's sneaky up here," he replied, his voice quiet, low, like a steady current. "You'll ruin your work." She glanced at his face, kind, tired, like someone who'd learned to live with ghosts. "You new here?" she asked. "Couple of weeks," he said. "Reyes." "Lena," she offered. "Painter of stars?" He smiled, the kind of smile that looked like it had forgotten how but was learning again. "Good thing," he said. "This town needs more light." That evening, she told Ellie about the stranger with the umbrella. Ellie, sitting cross-legged on the couch, asked, "Does he like stars too?" "I don't know," Lena said, smiling. "He looks more like the kind who watches the rain." Ellie frowned thoughtfully. "Maybe he's just waiting for the stars to come out." The next week, Lena stopped by his clinic. She wasn't sick, she just wanted to drop off a small painting she'd made, the lake under a storm. A single bright star reflected in the water. He looked at it for a long time before speaking. "You painted this?" he asked. She nodded. "You said the town needed light." He smiled softly. "I did, didn't I?" She shrugged. "Now it has one. You can hang it in the waiting room." He hesitated. "What do I owe you?" "Nothing," she said. "Consider it a welcome gift." He looked down at the painting again. "It's beautiful," he said finally, "and a little sad." "All good things are," she said, and left before he could ask what she meant. That night, Michael sat alone in his small apartment above the clinic, staring at the painting. The brushstrokes were gentle, full of patience. The star in the water looked fragile, almost human. He hadn't thought about stars in years, not since the night he lost a patient he couldn't save. A child, 10 years old, he still remembered the monitor, flatlining, the silence afterward, the way he'd looked out the window at the night sky and thought, even the brightest things burn out. He whispered to himself now, maybe not all of them. Meanwhile, back at the cabin, Ellie was drawing on the floor beside her mother's easel. "Mum," she said suddenly, "if Daddy's up there in the stars, does he see us?" Lena looked down, her throat tight. "I think so, baby." Ellie nodded. "Then maybe he sent Dr. Reyes." Lena smiled faintly. "And why would he do that?" "So we're not alone," Ellie said simply, and went back to coloring Dot outside. The stars blinked awake one by one, the first clear night of the season. Lena stepped onto the porch, looking up. The air smelled like rain and pine and possibility, for the first time in a long time. The sky didn't feel so far away. The morning started like any other. The light over Glacier Hollow was sharp and cold, the kind that turned dew into diamonds on the grass. Lena packed Ellie's lunch, peanut butter, apples, a note that said, "Be brave, my little star." They walked hand in hand down the dirt road to the school bus stop. "Remember," Lena said, bending down, "if it rains, wait inside until Mrs. Kemp gets you." Ellie rolled her eyes with the seriousness only a 6-year-old can manage. "Mum, I'm not made of sugar." Lena laughed. "Could have fooled me." She kissed the top of her daughter's head and watched the yellow bus pull away through the trees. For the rest of the morning, she painted. The sky was grey, and she mixed shades of blue until she found one that looked like memory dot around noon. Her phone rang. It was the school nurse, Mrs. Carter. The voice said, careful and steady, "You need to come to the school right now." Ellie fainted in class. Lena didn't remember the drive there, only the sound of her own breath, fast and thin. The blur of pine trees and the squeal of gravel under her tires when she burst into the nurse's office. Ellie was lying on a cot, pale, a damp cloth on her forehead. Her lips looked too light. Lena dropped to her knees beside her. "Hey, sweetheart. Hey, can you hear me?" Ellie's eyes fluttered open, confused but calm. "Mum." "I'm here," Lena said, brushing her hair back. "You're okay, baby. She just collapsed," the nurse said quietly. No warning. Pulse was weak, but steady. "She's awake now, thank God." Lena tried to steady her own voice. "I am taking her to the clinic." Michael Reyes looked up from a patient chart when the door slammed open. Lena stood there, breathing hard, carrying Ellie in her arms. "She fainted," Lena said, voice shaking. "Please, help her." He was beside them in an instant. "Set her down here." His tone was calm but commanding, the way only someone who'd seen chaos before could sound. He checked her pulse, her pupils, her breathing. "Has this happened before?" Lena shook her head. "No, never. Any heart murmurs. Shortness of breath. Fatigue. She's always been healthy. She runs everywhere." Michael nodded, already moving. "Okay, we'll run a quick ECG." 20 minutes later, Lena sat in the small waiting area, hands clasped so tightly they'd gone white. She watched him through the glass as he studied the readout. His brow furrowed, jaw set. When he came out, his face was composed, but there was a shadow behind his eyes, "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated. Her heart rhythm is irregular. It could be something minor, dehydration, maybe a fainting episode, but he exhaled. It could also be a congenital condition, a small defect in the electrical pathway. Lena blinked. Her heart. Yes, his tone softened. It doesn't mean it's serious, but it means we have to find out. She swallowed hard. You're saying she might have been born with it? Maybe, he said quietly, and maybe it's been waiting to show itself. They admitted Ellie for overnight observation. Lena stayed by her side, refusing to leave even when the nurse offered coffee and a blanket. She just sat there, stroking Ellie's hair, watching the monitor beep softly, that rhythmic, fragile sound that made her own heart ache. When Michael came by later, she looked up at him, eyes rimmed red. Is she going to be okay? He paused at the doorway. I think so. She's strong. You both are. You sound like you're trying to convince yourself, she said. He managed a small, sad smile. Maybe I am. Later that night, after Ellie fell asleep, Michael found Lena sitting outside the clinic under the flickering porch light. She looked exhausted, a mug of untouched coffee beside her. You should rest, he said gently. She shook her head. I can't. Every time she closes her eyes, I remember. When her dad left for the last time, she was holding his hand like that. Small, tight, like she knew he wasn't coming back. Michael sat beside her. You don't have to be strong all the time. She gave a hollow laugh. Then who will be? He looked down at his hands, the faint scars near his knuckles. Sometimes strength looks like asking for help. Lena turned to him. And you? What does it look like for you? He hesitated, trying again. Silence stretched between them. The night air was cool, smelling of rain and pine. Finally, Lena said softly, You've seen this before, haven't you? Kids with heart problems. He nodded once. I lost one. I'm sorry. He shook his head. So am I. The porch light flickered again, buzzing faintly. For a moment, both looked up, and through the mist, the first stars began to appear. Lena whispered, She loves the stars. Says they talk to her sometimes. Michael smiled faintly. Then she's already ahead of most of us. At dawn, the monitor's beeping steadied. Ellie stirred, opened her eyes, and saw the window full of pale blue light. Mum, she whispered. I'm here, baby. Ellie smiled weakly. The stars came back. Lena kissed her forehead, tears slipping free. They never left. Across the room, Michael watched quietly, hands in his pockets. The morning sun caught in his eyes, softening everything. He didn't say it out loud, but the thought came anyway, the one he hadn't allowed himself in years. Maybe hearts can learn how to beat again. Spring slipped into summer before anyone in Glacier Hollow really noticed. The snow melted from the pine branches, the lake turned silver again, and the sky stretched farther than it ever seemed in winter. Ellie recovered faster than the doctors predicted. Within a month, she was running again slower than before, but with that same unstoppable laughter that made the whole cabin feel alive. The clinic visits became routine, almost part of their week. Every Thursday, Lena packed a small bag snacks, a notebook, Ellie's favorite book of constellations, and drove into town. And every Thursday, Michael would be there waiting, leaning against the clinic door with that calm, steady presence that had somehow become familiar. One morning, when they arrived, Michael was kneeling by the flower bed outside, pulling weeds. Ellie hopped out of the car, waving. Dr. Reyes. He looked up, smiled. Hey, star counter. Lena raised an eyebrow. Star counter. She told me last week she's keeping track of how many stars she's seen in her life, he said. Apparently, she's at what was it? 2,301, Ellie declared proudly. But I might have missed a few cloudy nights. Michael chuckled. That's a solid sample size. Lena laughed softly. I can't believe you're encouraging her. He shrugged. I'm a doctor, not a dream killer. Inside, while Michael ran a quick checkup, Ellie asked, Do you think stars get lonely? He paused, stethoscope resting over her small chest. Why would they? They're all so far apart, she said. Even if they shine, they never get to touch. He thought for a moment, his voice gentle. Maybe that's how they talk, by shining. Maybe light's just another kind of touch. She smiled. That's what Mummy says. He glanced toward the hallway where Lena waited, half hidden behind the curtain. Her eyes met his for a second before she looked away, cheeks warming later that day after the appointment. Michael stepped outside to find Lena sitting on the clinic's porch steps, sketchbook in her lap. She's fine, he said quietly. Her rhythm's stable. We'll just keep monitoring. Lena exhaled, the tension leaving her shoulders. Thank you. You don't have to thank me. I do, she said, looking up. You're the first person who's made her feel safe in a long time. He nodded, unsure what to do with that kind of honesty. She's a remarkable kid. She's too much like her father, Lena said softly. Curious, stubborn, convinced the world listens if you speak kindly enough. Michael smiled faintly. Sounds like good qualities to inherit. She closed the sketchbook. They were. Until the world stopped listening. The wind shifted between them, carrying the smell of pine and rain. He didn't answer, but she saw it in his eyes, understanding. The quiet kind, the one that doesn't need words. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in over the lake. Lena offered him a ride home, insisting the storm looked bad. He tried to protest, but she raised an eyebrow. You really want to walk 2 miles in this? He grinned. You always win arguments like that. Only the good ones, she said. The road to the clinic wound past the lake, where mist hovered above the water. Inside the car, the rain drummed steady against the roof. Ellie sat in the back seat, humming to herself. Michael watched the blurred trees through the windshield. You ever get tired of the quiet here? Lena thought for a moment. Sometimes, but after what we've been through, silence feels like grace. He nodded slowly. I used to think noise meant life. Cities, traffic, machines beeping. Then I realized sometimes it's just noise. You were a surgeon, she said quietly. In the city. He looked out the window. What happened? He hesitated, then said, a mistake. The kind that teaches you humility in the worst way. She didn't press. And you came here to forget. He shook his head. To remember differently. She looked at him for a long time. Then, softly, that's what I'm trying to do, too. When they reached his place, a small cabin near the edge of Ellie gasped. Mum, he has a telescope. Michael smiled. You like stars, right? Ellie's eyes lit up. Can I see? Of course. He set up the telescope under the porch awning, adjusting it carefully as the rain slowed. You'll have to help me find one. Lena watched as her daughter peered through the eyepiece, her small hands steady on the metal tube. I see it, Ellie squealed. It's the big one, The really bright one. Michael leaned over, looking through the scope. That's Vega, he said. One of the stars that never fades. Ellie turned to her mother. That's mine, Lena smiled. Then it's yours. When Ellie dozed off in the car later, Lena lingered a moment before starting the engine. She has your calm, she said quietly. Michael glanced at the sleeping girl. She's got more strength than most people I know. Lena looked out at the dark lake. You know, she thinks her dad watches her through the stars. He nodded slowly. Maybe she's right. She said maybe he sent you, she added, voice barely above a whisper. Michael looked at her, rain reflecting in his eyes like small constellations. Then I'd better not disappoint him. That night, Lena carried Ellie inside, tucked her under the quilt, and stood by the window for a long time. The sky had cleared, and Vega shone bright steady, impossibly far, impossibly near in the stillness. She whispered, "Thank you." To who? She wasn't sure. Her husband, the stars, or the man who somehow felt like both. Outside, the night held its breath, shimmering with a quiet promise that something had shifted. Irrevocably, the sound of the rain had a different weight that week. It wasn't the usual soft drumming that came with spring. In Montana it was heavier, impatient, as if the sky itself was holding something back. Lena felt it too. Ellie's energy had dipped again. Not fainting, not sick but quieter. Her laughter took longer to appear, and when it did, it sounded like she was trying not to worry her mother. At the next checkup, Michael looked more serious than usual. He studied the new test results longer than he needed to, the quiet ticking of the wall clocks stretching between them. What's wrong? Lena asked finally, unable to stand it. He didn't answer right away. He traced the rhythm on the printout with a finger steady, pause, stumble. Her arrhythmias showing more frequently, he said finally. It's still controlled, but the intervals are shorter. What does that mean? It means her heart's working harder than it should. I want to run a deeper scan. Her hands tightened around her coat sleeve. You said she was stable. She is, he said carefully. But stability doesn't always mean safety. Lena swallowed hard. You think she's in danger? I think, he said quietly, we need to be careful before it becomes danger. She sat there for a long moment, staring at the small, pulsing line on the screen. Why didn't you tell me sooner? His expression flickered, hurt, guilt, restraint. Because I wasn't sure. You're a doctor, she said sharply. You're supposed to be sure. He took the blow quietly. I wanted to give her time to see if her heart would regulate itself, and if it hadn't. He met her eyes, his voice low. Then I'd have done exactly what I'm doing now. Everything I can. Her breath trembled. That's what they said before. The doctors. Before my husband. She stopped herself, but the sentence hung there anyway, like a ghost neither of them could ignore. Michael nodded slowly. I'm not them, I know, she said, voice cracking. That's the problem. Outside the clinic, the clouds had lowered so much the mountains looked swallowed by them. Lena drove home in silence, Ellie asleep in the back seat. The hum of the tires on wet asphalt sounded like a heartbeat she couldn't control that night. She sat by the window long after Ellie had gone to bed, her sketchbook open but untouched. She tried to paint the stars, but all she saw were the wires, the monitors, the cold white light of the hospital 5 years ago. When the knock came, she didn't move. Michael stood on the porch, soaked through, hair flattened by the rain. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, breathing hard, like he'd run all the way from town. Finally, he said, "I shouldn't have waited." Lena looked at him, silent. I thought he stopped, exhaled. I thought if I watched closely enough, I could protect her. But medicine isn't magic. And I'm not God. You think I don't know that? She said, voice low. I know you do, he replied. But I needed to say it out loud. For me, he hesitated before continuing. I made a mistake once. A boy, 10 years old. I told his parents to wait. I thought he'd grow out of the defect. He didn't, and when I tried to fix it, it was too late. The words hung in the air between them, heavy, soaked with rain. That's why you left, Lena whispered. He nodded. That's why I'm here. The storm rolled closer, thunder low and distant. She finally stepped aside. Come in before you drown. He gave a tired, grateful smile and followed her in. The cabin was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a lamp and the fire's dying light. Ellie's drawings covered the fridge stars. Animals, one labeled me, plus Mommy, plus Dr. Reyes under the big sky. He smiled faintly at that, then looked at Lena. She thinks I can fix anything. Maybe she's right, Lena said, her voice softer now. But you can't fix everything alone. He looked down. Neither can you. She poured him coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, the silence warm this time, not sharp. For the first time, Lena saw the tremor in his hands, not from cold, but from memory. You still hear it, she said quietly. The monitor, he nodded, eyes far away. Every night. It's the sound that tells me when I'm dreaming. And what about when you're awake? He looked at her then, really looked. Then I listened for something else. What? The sound of it still beating. Outside, the storm began to fade. Lena leaned back, exhaling. Ellie says stars talk to her. Michael smiled softly. She might be right. She told me the other day that Vega watches over her when she sleeps. Maybe she's seeing something I can't. He met her eyes. Maybe you've just forgotten how. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt charged, like the space before lightning. Lena blinked first, turning toward the window. You should go before the roads flood. I'll stay until the rain stops, he said gently. If that's okay. She didn't answer, but she didn't say no. They sat there until the thunder drifted away and the stars came out one by one, shimmering through the thinning clouds for the first time. She didn't look away. When Michael finally left, the sky had cleared completely. The air smelled clean, electric, alive. Lena stood on the porch, watching him walk down the road. His shadow long in the moonlight. She whispered into the quiet, You can't fix everything, but maybe you were meant to fix this. The wind carried her words upward, into a sky that no longer felt like distance, only waiting. The summer air in Glacier Hollow carried a strange kind of quiet, the kind that came before a decision that would change everything. Ellie's condition had stabilized for now, but Michael knew it wouldn't last. The tests told a story Lena didn't want to read, yet one of narrowing arteries, a weak conduction system, and time running thinner each day. He sat in his office late one night, the clinic empty, lights dimmed to gold. Her file lay open before him, pages scattered with ink and EKG tracings. Next to it sat a small watercolor painting, the one Lena had given him on his first week, a lake, a single bright star. He traced the brushstrokes with his finger. Even light looks fragile up close, he thought. But it still travels miles. The next morning, he called Lena. "Can you come in today?" he asked, voice calm but quiet. Her heart dropped. "Is something wrong?" He paused. "We need to talk." When she arrived, Ellie was out back with the nurse, chasing dragonflies. Michael closed the office door behind them, his expression steady but strained. "There's a procedure," he said. "A minimally invasive ablation. It could stabilize her rhythm permanently." "Could," Lena repeated, clinging to the word. "Or could not." "It's low risk," he said, "but it's still a procedure on a child's heart. I won't lie, it's delicate. But it's her best chance to live without limits." Her pulse hammered. "And you'd do it?" He hesitated. "I want to, you want to." She echoed. "That's not the same as should." He met her eyes, and there was something raw there. "I've been in that operating room before. I know what can go wrong. But I also know what happens when we wait too long." Lena's hands trembled. "You think you can save her? I think I have to try." She sat in silence, staring at the floor. The sound of Ellie's laughter floated faintly through the open window light. "Untouchable, finally," Lena whispered. "You're asking me to trust you with her life." He swallowed hard. "Yes, and if it goes wrong," he breathed out slowly, "then I'll never forgive myself." She looked up sharply. "That's not what I asked." He held her gaze. "It won't go wrong. Don't promise that," she said, voice shaking. "You don't get to promise that." Michael's voice cracked for the first time. "Then tell me what I can say. Tell me," she whispered, "that if she doesn't make it, you'll still come back." He blinked, startled. "Why would you want that?" "Because if you don't, I'll never forgive myself for letting you go." The silence that followed was unbearable, full of all the things they hadn't said. All the ways fear masquerades as strength. He reached across the table, not to take her hand, but to rest his own palm near hers, not touching, just close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I'll be there," he said softly, "no matter what." For the first time, she didn't pull away. That night, after putting Ellie to bed, Lena sat at her easel. But she didn't paint the sky this time. She painted the inside of a heart. Not anatomically, she didn't know how to. She painted what she felt, light spilling through cracks, thin threads of gold weaving across the red, like veins of sunrise fighting through darkness. When she finished, she whispered, "For you, baby. For the stars that stay." The next day, she brought Ellie to the clinic. Michael had everything prepared. Small room, machines humming quietly. A nurse with gentle eyes. Lena stood beside her daughter's bed, brushing the hair from her face. "Mom," Ellie said softly, "am I going to sleep?" "Just for a little while," Lena said, forcing a smile. "Will I dream?" Lena's voice wavered. "Probably," Ellie grinned. "Then I'll count stars until I wake up." Michael adjusted her foreline, his movements precise, controlled. But inside, he was unraveling. This was it. The chance to do what he hadn't been able to before, to fix. A heart without breaking another. He glanced at Lena before putting on his gloves. She nodded once, silently. Time slowed inside the operating room. He guided the catheter with steady hands, watching the monitor trace out her rhythm like a song he'd almost forgotten. A pause, a flare, a perfect beat. He whispered under his breath, "Come on, little star. Stay with me." The silence stretched, and then a steady rhythm filled the room. The monitor's tone leveled into a calm. Even beep, he exhaled, the kind of breath that feels like forgiveness. Hours later, when Lena saw him step into the hallway, his eyes told her before his words did. "She's okay," he said quietly. Her knees gave out. He caught her before she hit the floor. "She's okay," he repeated, his voice breaking now. "She's really okay." That night, Michael sat outside the cabin, staring up at the stars. Lena joined him, a blanket around her shoulders. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, she said, "You did it." He shook his head. "She did. Her heart did. I just reminded it how to fight." Lena looked at him, her eyes reflecting the sky. "You saved her." He turned toward her, voice barely a whisper. "Maybe we saved each other." The morning after the surgery, the world felt impossibly still. The lake outside the hospital window looked like glass. Pine trees stood motionless, wrapped in fog. Even the birds seemed to be holding their breath. Lena sat beside Ellie's bed, her hand curled loosely round her daughter's small fingers. A soft beeping filled the room, a rhythm steady and sure. For the first time in years, she didn't hate that sound. When Ellie stirred, Lena whispered, "Hey, sweetheart." Ellie blinked groggily. "Mum, did I see the stars?" Tears stung Lena's eyes. "Maybe you did." Ellie smiled weakly. They were really close this time. Later, when she went to find Michael, the nurses told her he'd already left. She repeated, stunned, "Where?" He said he had something to take care of in the city. One of them said gently. Didn't say when he'd be back. She nodded numbly, trying to make sense of it. After everything, after saving Ellie, after promising he was just gone, she found his office empty, the desk cleared except for one thing. A small note tucked beneath the painting she'd given him months ago. "Sometimes healing looks like leaving, so that the heart can learn how to miss and still keep beating. Mr." For days afterward, the clinic door stayed closed. The people in town asked, where'd the doctor go? Lena didn't have an answer. She focused on Ellie's recovery instead. They spent long afternoons on the porch, counting dragonflies, listening to the lake breathe. Ellie's color returned. Her laughter grew stronger. But each night, when the stars came out, Lena would glance at the road that led out of town, the one that vanished into the mountains, and wonder if he was somewhere under the same sky. A month passed. Then two. Summer gave way to early autumn, crisp air, slow sunsets, gold spilling through the trees. Lena returned to her studio. She painted again, though the colors had changed. Softer, quieter, like someone whispering rather than shouting. One evening, Ellie came in holding a sheet of paper. "Mum, look. I wrote him a letter." Lena turned, her brush midair. "Who, sweetheart?" "Dr. Reyes." Ellie said matter-of-factly. "You told me when you miss someone, you write to them." "So I did." Lena smiled sadly. "What did you say?" Ellie unfolded the paper and read aloud, "Dear Dr. Reyes, my heart doesn't hurt anymore. Mummy says you fixed it, but I think maybe you just taught it how to listen. If you ever get sad again, you can look at Vega. That one's ours. Love, Ellie." Lena swallowed hard. "That's beautiful, honey," Ellie grinned. "Do you think he'll see it?" "Maybe," Lena said softly. "Maybe the stars will tell him." Weeks later, Lena drove into town to deliver new paintings to the gallery. On the way back, she passed the clinic. The windows were dark, shutters drawn, except one. Through the glass, she saw a single light on, and for a heartbeat, she thought, hoped, it might be him. But when she parked and went closer, the room was empty. Only the painting she'd given him hung on the wall now, the one of the lake and the bright star. Someone had moved it so that the star reflected perfectly in the clinic's front window. Shining faintly even in daylight, she stood there for a long time, watching that reflection, and realized something she hadn't before. Maybe waiting wasn't just about someone coming back. Maybe it was about keeping the light on until they did. That night, after putting Ellie to bed, she stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool, the stars sharp against the velvet sky. Vega burned high overhead, constant, stubborn, alive. She whispered to the night, "If you're still listening, thank you." The wind brushed through the pines like an answer. And though the road beyond the trees remained empty, she didn't feel alone anymore. Somewhere out there, she thought, a man was learning how to breathe again under the same sky that waited for them both. For a while, everything was simple again. Michael moved into a small cottage near the lake, close enough that Ellie could run down the hill to visit him, but far enough that he and Lena could breathe. The town welcomed him back easily. Glacier Hollow had a soft spot for people who left and returned better than before. He reopened the clinic, one room at a time. The walls smelled of cedar and paint. Lena stopped by on weekends, sometimes with sandwiches, sometimes with silence. She painted in the mornings now, in a room full of sunlight. He worked with patience in the afternoons, his voice calm, steady, always listening first. They built something quiet between them, not fireworks, but warmth. Something like light finding a place to rest. One evening, over dinner at her cabin, he said, "The regional hospital called me last week." Lena looked up. "About what?" "They offered me a position, head of cardiology. It's only an hour away. Better equipment, more resources." Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "You're thinking of taking it?" He nodded slowly. "It's the kind of chance I left behind before. It would mean more surgeries, more kids like Ellie, and less of this," she said softly, gesturing around the small table. "The cabin, the laughter, the quiet," he sighed. "I don't know how to choose between what I do and what I've found here." She smiled faintly. "Maybe you don't have to choose. Maybe you just have to weigh them." That night, after he'd gone, she stood on the porch, the autumn wind curling around her. She thought of how much she'd given up once before, of the man she'd lost to a war he thought he had to fight, and the years it took her to stop fighting the silence he left behind. Now here was another man, gentle and brave in a different way, standing at another kind of crossroads. For the first time, she realized love wasn't about holding someone in place. It was about giving them enough light to find their way back. Days turned to weeks. Michael accepted the position, but on one condition: he'd commute, splitting his time between the hospital and the town. "Every Friday, I'll be back," he said. "Non-negotiable." Lena raised an eyebrow. "Doctors and promises don't usually mix." He smiled. "I'm learning." Ellie, listening from the porch steps, clapped her hands. "Does that mean you'll be here for stargazing Fridays?" "Every one of them," he said. The first Friday after he started, he arrived late, almost midnight. Lena was still awake, painting by the fire. The door creaked, and she didn't look up. "You're late," she said. "I got lost," he murmured, setting his bag down. "Too many stars out tonight." She turned then, saw the exhaustion in his face. "How was it?" He exhaled, loud, bright, full of people who still believe in miracles. She smiled gently. And you, he paused. I'm trying to believe in quieter ones. He stepped closer, stopping just a breath away. The firelight flickered between them, warm, trembling, alive. Lena whispered, "You smell like rain and hospital soap." He smiled tiredly, "And you smell like home." The nights they shared after that were small, tender, full of unfinished conversations. They didn't rush anything. They cooked. They watched Ellie chase fireflies. They sat on the porch with wine and silence. There were no declarations, no grand gestures, just two people learning how to exist without fear of losing again. One evening, Ellie came out with her telescope. "Look," she said, eyes wide. "Vega's brighter tonight." Michael looked through the scope, then up at the real sky. "Maybe it's closer. Stars don't move," Ellie said confidently. "Maybe we did," he said. Lena, standing beside them, whispered, "Maybe we finally caught up." When winter came, the lake froze at the edges, and light spilled early across the snow. Michael built a small swing for Ellie on the porch beam, the same way her father once had. Lena watched him, a cup of coffee warming her hands, her chest full of that ache that's half love, half fear. He looked up at her. "You okay?" She nodded, just realizing how heavy happiness can be. He smiled softly. "It's the good kind of heavy." Later that night, when the stars came out sharp and cold, Lena stood beside him, the world silver around them. "Do you ever get scared?" she asked. He turned to her. "Every day. Of what?" "Of forgetting how lucky I am." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Then I'll remind you." He wrapped an arm round her, pulling her close. "You already do." They stood there for a long time, watching Vega burn high and unwavering above the dark line of the pines. It wasn't the brightest star in the sky, but it was the one that never left. And beneath its light, two hearts beat quietly in sync, carrying the weight of what they'd lost and what they'd finally found. It was snowing again in Glacier Hollow, the kind of snow that didn't make a sound, only softened everything it touched. The lake was frozen now, a white sheet under a grey sky. Inside the cabin, a fire hummed low in the hearth, and the world smelled of cedar, coffee, and paint. Michael had been gone for days. Lena counted them in silence, not with resentment, but with the steady rhythm of someone who knew how absence could hum beneath the skin like an old song. He'd left for the hospital in the city, a complex surgery, a child with a heart even more fragile than Ellie's had been. He'd promised to call every night. He had. And yet, each time she hung up, the house felt heavier, quieter. Ellie sat on the rug, drawing stars in crayon. "Mum," she said, "when Dr. Reyes fixes another kid's heart, does that mean he's giving away his own?" Lena blinked. "What do you mean, baby?" "He said hearts can only hold so much," Ellie said, serious in the way only children could be. "So maybe he gives little pieces to other people." Lena smiled softly, fighting tears. "Maybe he just knows how to help them grow their own." On the fifth night, the phone didn't ring. At first, she told herself he was busy, still in surgery. Then, maybe he fell asleep. By midnight, she was sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a blanket, the snow still falling. The phone cold in her hands. The stars were faint that night, a thin scattering, like someone had erased half the sky. She whispered into the dark, "Don't disappear again." The wind carried her breath away before the words could fall. 2 days later, the call came. Lena, his voice on the other end was tired, rough. "I'm sorry." She closed her eyes. "You're alive. That's all that matters." "There was a complication," he said. "The boy didn't make it." She said nothing, just listened to the silence between his words. He breathed in sharply, as if trying to hold himself together. "I did everything right this time. Every step, every measure. And it's still Michael," she said gently. "You can't save everyone." His voice cracked. "I know. I just thought I could at least save one more." After the call, she sat by the window for a long time, watching the snow gather against the glass. She thought about what Ellie had said about giving away pieces of his heart. Maybe he was running out of pieces to give that night. She took out a fresh canvas and began to paint, not the stars, not the lake. Just light, fractured, scattered, falling through darkness like something stubborn refusing to die out. When she finished, she wrote a small line in the corner. "Even broken light still finds a way to reach us." Michael returned 3 days later. Lena was waiting on the porch, a mug of coffee in her hands. He looked exhausted, eyes shadowed, shoulders slumped. His hands trembled when he took the mug. She didn't say anything. Just let him stand there, the warmth seeping slowly back into his fingers. Finally, he said, "I almost didn't come back." She looked at him, calm. "Why? Because every time I lose someone, I lose a part of myself. I didn't want you to see what's left." Lena stepped closer. "You think I only want the parts that aren't broken?" He tried to smile, but it faltered. "I don't know what I think anymore." She touched his cheek, gently. "Then don't think. Just breathe." Inside, the cabin smelled like firewood and cinnamon. Ellie came running from the hall. "Dr. Reyes." He crouched down just in time for her to throw her arms round his neck. "I saved a drawing for you," she said, thrusting a paper into his hands. It showed 3 stars, drawn with uneven gold lines. Underneath, she'd written in block letters, "Stars don't get smaller when they're sad." He laughed, voice breaking. That's beautiful." Lena knelt beside them, smiling through tears. She learned that one herself. He looked at both of them, the woman who'd taught him how to live again, and the child who'd taught him what a heart really was. And for the first time in weeks, he let himself cry that night. As they sat by the fire, he whispered, "You know, I used to think light was weightless." Lena looked at him. "And now I think it's the heaviest thing there is. Because once it touches you, you can't ever go back to the dark." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then don't," he smiled faintly. "I'm trying." They sat that way until the fire burned low, their shadows flickering against the wall like 2 stars learning how to stay still. Outside, the snow kept falling, quiet, constant, endless. The kind of snow that covers everything, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. Winter deepened slowly in Glacier Hollow. The trees turned skeletal against a grey-white sky, and the lake disappeared beneath a sheet of frozen light. Inside the cabin, life continued, quiet, rhythmic, full of small things that mattered. Lena, painted by the window. Michael repaired the porch steps. Ellie built snow forts that lasted exactly 1 afternoon before melting under laughter. For a while, it almost felt like time had softened its grip. But love, Lena knew, had a way of testing the peace it gave. One evening, as Michael packed his duffel bag for another week at the city hospital, Lena watched from the doorway. She didn't say anything at first, just folded the sleeves of his coat so the edges wouldn't fray. He noticed, "You hate it when I leave." She smiled faintly. "I hate pretending I don't." He zipped the bag closed. "It's just 1 week. I know you trust me, right?" She hesitated. "That's not what scares me." He looked at her. "Then what does?" "That one day you'll forget to come back." He set the bag down, stepped closer. "I always come back." "You say that like it's a fact," she said softly. "But people vanish every day. Into work, into pain, into things they think they owe the world." He sighed, the kind of breath that carries both truth and fatigue. "I'm not leaving because I want to. I'm leaving because I can still help." She nodded slowly. "And who helps you?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, he didn't have an answer. The week stretched into 10 days. Snow piled against the windows, the roads turned silver, and the phone stayed mostly silent. Lena filled the silence with brushstrokes. She painted the sky not as it was, but as she wanted it to be, full of motion, of color, of proof that distance didn't mean gone. Each night, she'd light the small lantern on the porch, a promise flickering in the cold. "Mum," Ellie asked one night, "is that so Dr. Reyes can find our house?" Lena smiled. "Something like that." When Michael finally returned, he looked different, thinner, paler, carrying something invisible but heavy. The snow crunched under his boots as he walked toward the cabin. Lena was waiting by the fire, arms crossed, eyes soft but steady. He stopped at the door. "You kept the light on?" She nodded. "So you'd remember where home is." He stepped inside, hesitating. "There was another patient," he began, voice raw. "A little girl, same age as Ellie. We almost lost her, but this time we didn't." Lena breathed out. "That's good." He nodded, but his eyes didn't lift. "The mother looked at me the way you did that night in the clinic. The same fear, the same hope. I don't know how much more of that I can hold." She stepped closer, then stopped trying to hold it. "Let someone else hold you." He met her eyes, tired, lost. "And what if I break again?" "Then we'll build around the cracks," she said quietly. "That's what light does." He exhaled, long, trembling, like a man remembering what it meant to rest. For a while, they just stood there, the fire painting their shadows against the walls. Finally, he said, "I don't want to keep leaving. Not like this. Not when I can't promise I'll always find my way back." "Then stay," she said simply. He blinked. "You'd ask me to give up." "No," she interrupted. "I'd ask you to choose. To save one more person, yourself." That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the snow drift over the lake. The lantern burned beside him, small and stubborn. When Lena came out, she didn't say anything, just sat next to him, their shoulders brushing. Finally, he whispered, "If I stop being a doctor, what am I?" She looked at him, her breath clouding the air. "Human, loved, enough." He swallowed hard. "And if I can't stop?" She smiled faintly. "Then promise me you won't forget what it feels like to stay." The next morning, he told the hospital he'd take a leave, indefinite. When they asked why, he said simply, "Because some hearts need time to rest." He didn't explain whose weeks passed. The snow began to thaw. Michael started helping at the local clinic again, teaching younger medics. Lena painted the first sunrise of the year, soft gold bleeding into pale blue. And Ellie, ever the observer of light, told them both one morning, "I think hearts are like stars." Michael smiled. "Why is that?" "Because they don't really disappear," she said. "They just move far away until someone misses them enough." Lena and Michael exchanged a look, quiet, full, complete. That evening, as twilight settled, Michael joined her on the porch. Again, the lake shimmered with the first reflection of stars. He said softly, "You were right. About staying." She tilted her head. "Yeah. I thought I was saving hearts," he said. "Turns out I just needed mine to have somewhere to live." She reached for his hand. "You found it." He squeezed her fingers gently. "No," he whispered. "It found me." Above them, Vega flickered through the last trace of dusk, constant, luminous, watching. 3 years later, the lake no longer froze the way it used to. The winters were gentler now, the kind that brushed the earth instead of burying it. Maybe the world had softened all. Maybe they had. The cabin had changed too. Michael built a small sunroom on the back, where Lena painted in the mornings. The walls were mostly glass, and when the light came in, it turned the room into water. Ellie called it Mum's sky room. The clinic in town was thriving again. Michael ran it 3 days a week, mentoring young doctors. He still got calls from the city hospital, but he always answered the same way. "My hands are full here." He meant it every time. That morning, the house smelled of pancakes and pine. Ellie, now 9, sat at the kitchen table, cutting strawberries into heart shapes. Lena poured coffee, her hair loose, her cheeks flushed with warmth. Michael came in from outside, snow still clinging to his coat. "Holding the mail letter for you," he said, handing it to her. She frowned. "No one writes letters anymore." He smiled. "Maybe that's why this one found you." She turned it over. No return address, just her name, written in familiar, careful handwriting. Her heart skipped. She opened it slowly. "Dear Mrs. Carter, you don't know me, but my daughter was one of Dr. Reyes's patients at St. Luke's. He told us once about a little girl who loved stars and taught him how to believe again. He said her name was Ellie. I wanted you to know my daughter's heart is strong now. She runs, she dances, she lives. Because of him, I don't think he'll ever tell you how many people he saved just by being who he is. But I thought you should know, his light doesn't fade. Even far away, with love and gratitude. A mother who remembers." Lena read it twice before looking up. Michael stood by the counter, still watching her. "You didn't tell me," she said quietly. He shrugged, smiling faintly. "Didn't think I needed to." She crossed the room and kissed him slowly, gently, like someone thanking the universe. "Looks like your light travels farther than you think," she murmured. He touched her cheek. "Only because you keep it burning." That evening, the 3 of them went down to the lake. The ice was thin, shimmering under the faint glow of the sky. Ellie carried her telescope, dragging it through the snow, determined. "I want to see Vega again," she said. "I haven't counted stars in a while." Lena laughed. "How many did you get to last time?" 3,012, Ellie said proudly. "But I think I missed a few." Michael grinned. "We'll help you catch up." They set up the telescope on the ridge, where the wind whispered through the pines. The first stars blinked awake, slow, steady, patient. Lena lay back on the blanket, her head on Michael's shoulder. Ellie between them with a notebook and a penlight there. Ellie said, pointing. "Vega." Michael followed her finger, smiling. Our star, Lena whispered, the one that never left. Silence settled around them, soft and full. Somewhere behind the horizon, the last traces of sun slipped away, leaving only starlight and breath. Lena turned to him. Do you ever think about how far light travels? He nodded. Billions of miles. Years, even. Some of what we see tonight started its journey before any of us were born. She smiled faintly. Then maybe love works the same way. He looked at her, eyes warm. You mean it outlives us? I mean it finds us, she said softly. No matter how far we go. Later, after Ellie fell asleep between them, Michael watched Lena watching the sky. He whispered, You still paint it every day. Doesn't it ever get old? She smiled without turning. The sky never repeats itself. Neither do we. He leaned in, kissed her temple. You still talk like a poet. You still sound like a man who believes her, she replied. They both laughed quietly. The kind of laugh that didn't break the night, just blended into it. When they finally went back inside, the house glowed behind them, a beacon in the dark, a heart made of wood and warmth. On the wall above the fireplace hung Lena's newest painting, the night sky in her eyes. It wasn't just stars. It was 3 figures standing under a sky that seemed to bend toward them, as if light itself had learned how to stay. Before bed, Lena wrote one final line in her journal. Love isn't the light we find. It's the one we keep alive after everything else fades. She closed the book, turned off the lamp, and whispered into the dark, Good night, Vega. Outside, the stars shimmered in quiet reply.